Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on this lovely summer morning. Dr. Kelli Shapiro is a public historian and historic preservationist who grew up in the San Gabriel Valley and now lives in the Inland Empire. She holds a BA in American Studies from Pomona College and a graduate certificate in public history from Texas State University, as well as a master's degree in museum studies and a PhD in American civilization, both from Brown University. Over the years, she has been a volunteer, intern, student, employee, and her staff at multiple public history and preservation organizations in several states. She has written successful state landmark nominations and entries for several encyclopedias. She has also published 2 local history books for Arcadia Publishing, the most recent being Inland Empire and San Gabriel Valley Movie Theaters, which is the subject of our program today, and it's also available for purchase at the conclusion of the program. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kelli Shapiro.
Hello, thank you so much for coming. So I'm Kelli Shapiro, and I'm here to discuss the history and evolution of a crucial and beloved cultural site in our region, the movie theater. My presentation today is based on my new book, Inland Empire and San Gabriel Valley Movie Theaters. However, it also differs greatly from the book structurally. This presentation gives a broad overview of the topic. It's a combination of chronological and topical history, and it especially focuses on the development of movie theaters as a place and a building type. It will cover theater design, the different types of theaters, the changes they went through, their survival strategies and decline, etc. More than that, though, I will be discussing the broader context surrounding these theaters and their evolution, such as the major transformations of this area through suburbanization, major demographic shifts, etc. I'll be using local theater examples to tell both a specific and a nationally applicable story about theater's rise, fall, and preservation in the midst of larger social and cultural and place-based changes. So the information I provide on individual movie houses will be necessarily brief and related to this larger tale of transformation. If you'd like more information on the theaters I mention here, in most cases, that's in the book. The book doesn't include multiplexes, though. I stuck to single screen venues there. So let me tell you a little bit about the book. The book contains archival images and historical information regarding almost 200 historic movie theaters. Unlike this presentation, the book is not thematic at all. It's structured to make specific theaters and places easy for readers to find. It has regional chapters and chapters for the historically largest or most significant city in each area. So it goes Riverside County, City of Riverside, San Bernardino County, City of San Bernardino, San Gabriel Valley, and City of Pasadena. And then within each regional or county chapter, it's organized alphabetically by town. So it's very easy to navigate and find the theater you're looking for. A big note here is that I used governmental boundaries in terms of how I define the areas for the book, which are often, conceptualized rather loosely by locals. For the San Gabriel Valley, I used the definition from the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments, which includes 31 cities. And for the Inland Empire, I used the broadest possible definition, the Riverside, San Bernardino, Ontario Metropolitan Statistical Area, which is comprised of Riverside and San Bernardino counties in full. Now, I know people's definitions of the Inland Empire differ a lot and are often much narrower than that, but this is how the federal government categorizes our area, so that's what I used, just FYI. Before I dive into the transformations that movie theaters locally have undergone over time, I wanted to ask, pose the question, why should we care about the history of local film exhibition? Why do movie theaters matter? A major reason often used in landmark nominations and preservation efforts is theaters' architectural significance, as well as their crucial place in historic downtowns, where they have long served as a prime draw for people, their presence also benefiting nearby shops, restaurants, etc. Additionally, early movie houses did much more than just screen films, showcase vaudeville, etc. They performed an array of valuable functions for their cities. They often held local organizations' fundraisers and meetings, like the 29 Palms Theater did. Some threw Christmas parties for children and offered free holiday film screenings, such as happened at Alhambra's El Rey Theater. Some even hosted beauty pageants and talent shows, as the Ukaipa Theater did. Throughout the 20th century, cinemas were an integral part of community life, far beyond simply being a place where people could go to watch a feature film, along with a cartoon, serial, newsreel, etc. Still, the movie-going experience itself was, and still is, a powerful one. When locals share their memories of attending movie theaters, even including today's multiplexes, trends clearly appear regarding these places' sociocultural importance. Many people reminisce about how their very first job was at a theater, and often their first date, too. In college towns, former students recall seeing films as being a relaxing break from classes and studying, especially with college student discounts like those offered by Claremont's Village Theater. Some citizens look further back to their childhoods, remembering attending Saturday matinees packed with kids, all enjoying munching on popcorn and candy, which they occasionally threw, while laughing at animated antics, booing villains, and cheering for cowboys and other on-screen heroes. And here, we see kids lined up at the box office of the Palm Springs Theater. Certain people's memories include the excitement of sneaking into drive-in theaters, where they avoided payment, or tried to, although they were often caught, by hiding in cars' trunks. Still others remember standing in long lines outside while waiting to see Hollywood blockbusters, an experience that the Redlands newspaper captured when Star Wars played at the Fox Redlands Theater. That sort of thing happens much less often now, but we can still see it occurring with cultural phenomena like summer 2023's Barbenheimer. Even so, events like that could take place anywhere in the US, but the Inland Empire and San Gabriel Valley have always held a special place in film history. While not nationally known for their movie theaters, like Los Angeles and Hollywood are, the region has been a popular destination not only for new residents, but also for movie studios. Along with shooting a vast number of films here, some studios, such as 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers, owned and operated many of their own local theaters. Multiple world premieres were held at movie houses in the area. Also, because of the region's proximity to Hollywood and its more rural and suburban settings, local cinemas frequently held studios' test screenings. Audiences' responses here thus influenced what moviegoers saw on their own theater screens. Beyond their unique status due to movie studios' efforts here, the Inland Empire and San Gabriel Valley are also important as a representative site. Here, film exhibition history both reflects and reveals widespread cultural, social, and demographic transformations and trends, many of which impacted not just this area, but the entire country. The history of movie theaters in this region showcases national trajectories on a manageable level and is also an important subject of study in itself. At the beginning stages of movie theater evolution, the first places to show films were often not movie theaters, or at least did not start out as such. Across our area, stage theaters, such as opera houses, playhouses, and vaudeville venues, began screening films in the early 1900s. Most retained their original function of hosting live performances along with showing movies, either regularly or irregularly, at least for a number of years, at which point many switched entirely to film. One such example locally is the Fletcher Opera House in Barstow, which opened in 1909, when, as you can see, downtown Barstow still had dirt streets. By 1914, the Fletcher was playing films, which continued until it burned down in 1922. While many performance venues switched to screening films, other facilities opened specifically for that purpose. In 1902, California's first movie house opened, Tally's Electric Theater in Los Angeles. More important nationally was Pittsburgh's Nickelodeon, which opened in 1905. There, inside a former store, patrons saw short films projected on a sheet. Harry Davis, the Nickelodeon's owner/creator, licensed his idea, and it spread across the country. Its name caught on for this type of movie show place. The name combined nickel, the typical price of admission at the time, with Odeon, the Greek word for a place to view something, meaning a theater. Nickelodeons were generally repurposed downtown storefronts in existing buildings, as was the case with Tally's Electric and with the 1914 Warner's Photoplay in Pasadena. Some were purpose-built, but that was rare in the earliest days. They were generally tiny, rudimentary, and cheap to open. Nickelodeons were also typically quite short-lived. The Photoplay, which lasted until 1927, did better than most. If a Nickelodeon survived, it often changed names, sometimes multiple times, as it went through new owners, remodels, etc. Some of them would move to better locations when one became available, like Covina's 1910 Isis Theater did in 1911, before becoming the Star Theater, which showed films until 1921. Its building still stands. One type of movie theater that is barely remembered today, and that is very hard to find photographs of, even nationally, is the Airdrome or Airdome. These were open-air theaters without ceilings and sometimes without four walls that were generally found on vacant lots in central business districts. Most of them were very plain and basic. They had movable chairs or benches with a screen or even a sheet at the end. The floor was usually just dirt or sawdust. Although inexpensive and easy to establish, airdromes had fundamental problems. Sitting outdoors in the winter was usually undesirable, albeit more in the rest of the country than in Southern California. Also, having a lot sit unused part of the year, and often during the day, was an inefficient use of space and money, causing most airdromes to fail quickly. The one we see here actually survived for decades because it wasn't a typical airdrome. Located in the isolated Mojave Desert borax mining company town of Trona, this open-air theater actually sat in the central courtyard of the town's 1913 multi-purpose building, Austin Hall. Called the Trona Theater, it opened in 1926 and survived all the way until 1954, when Trona's indoor Fox Theater arrived. Reasons for this airdrome's rare survival included that its land wasn't needed for anything else, that there was no local competition for decades, and that it could be used year-round because of the retractable canvas covers right here that could be rolled across the auditorium on rainy days. While most airdromes quickly vanished from the local landscape, some open-air theaters were later enclosed, thus changing their identity. That was the case with the two examples seen here. In the photo in the left of Blythe, circa 1915, if you look closely, right here, you can see the word airdrome written above the entry of what is obviously sort of a basic rudimentary half wall. And the building next to it, right here, is the Liberty Theater, its competitor. You can see the poster boards for movies right here. And the Liberty Theater soon expanded and took over the airdrome space, with the larger movie venue then stretching all the way to the Rexall Drug, which remained here on the corner. It operated until 1946. Over here on the right, we have the Art Deco Paris Theater, which opened in 1946 on the site of an airdrome that had been operating since the 1930s. The newer movie house served the community in the 1990s and still stands vacant today. As movie venues opened in larger and purpose-built facilities, the facades evolved to focus on promoting the films shown. With Nickelodeons, airdromes, and converted opera houses, people might only recognize that they were theaters because of the poster cases or poster boards out front, or maybe from a lighted sign or a ticket booth, although many of the storefront theaters didn't have those outside. Those features can be seen at Needles Liberty Theater, where a small sign there advertised the 1920 film Humoresque. Pedestrians were expected to stop as they walked by to read the necessary information. These theaters were pedestrian-oriented, and this advertising method was primarily effective during the day. But then, what we understand today to be a theater marquee came along. a large structure with room for changeable letters to promote the films, often shown on 2 or 3 sides of the marquee, so that people in passing cars could easily and quickly see what was playing and who starred in it from whatever direction they were driving. Lighting, particularly neon, was crucial too, with the glow really making the theater and its offerings stand out and show up in the dark, as you can see here at Fontana's 1948 Harper Theater. The arrival of sound films in the late 1920s caused a massive shift for theaters. Many local venues shut down, with their owners not able to afford the new costly upgrades needed for showing talkies. More fortunate owners not only added sound equipment, but sometimes used the change as an opportunity to remodel and even rename their showplaces. That occurred at San Bernardino's Strand Theater, a 1910 venue that in 1930 changed its name to the Ritz upon gaining Warner Brothers' Vitaphone sound system, which its new marquee proudly touted. In local downtowns, competition became increasingly fierce. In 1926, when the Film Daily Yearbook Trade Journal offered its first state-by-state list of movie houses, San Gabriel Valley and Inland Empire cities offered approximately 50. Much of that amount was new construction, with relatively older, smaller theaters, such as Nickelodeon's, often closing after larger, nicer showplaces opened nearby. Sometimes they even had the same owners, which was the case in Lake Elsinore. There, Nell Jackson, a rare female owner, closed her 1920 Elsinore Theater when she opened the Lake Theater in 1950 nearby. Nell Jackson only owned one theater at a time, but locally and nationally, other owners grew to dominate local markets through theater circuits, now known as chains. Some circuits were independent, like the one founded by the region's main movie house mogul, James Edwards. He launched his film exhibition career in 1930 when he took over Monterey Park's Mission Theater, built in 1925. Founding Edwards Theaters, he opened dozens of movie houses statewide until his 1997 death. His name still appears on about 25 multiplexes, now owned by the Regal chain, including Ontario's neon-trimmed 1999 Mountain Village Stadium 14. When James Edwards started his circuit with the Mission Theater, he bought it from the region's other major circuit, Fox West Coast. Originally affiliated with the 20th Century Fox movie studio, the chain bought and or opened many movie houses throughout the region and across the state, at which to exclusively show the studio's films. Numerous local venues were called or renamed either the Fox Theater or the Fox fill-in-the-blank Theater. That happened at the formerly independent 1911 Clunes Pasadena Theater, which became the Fox Pasadena Theater in 1930, when it also received this Mission Revival style remodel. After a Supreme Court antitrust case led to the 1948 Paramount consent decrees, movie studios' monopolization of many cities' film exhibition ended across the country. 20th Century Fox was forced to divest Fox West Coast, while other studios with circuits, like Paramount Pictures and Warner Brothers, also released their theaters. However, the Fox circuit's name lived on. For instance, Banning's 1928 Banning Theater gained its current Fox title as part of a 1953 Art Deco remodel, much of which the operational movie house still showcases today. With the coming of circuits, moguls, and ever-increasing competition, theater operators and architects began to realize that to compete, a movie venue had to do more than simply beat the others in terms of comfort, cleanliness, and the quality of films shown. It had to provide the audience with a better overall entertainment experience. The arrival of this experience concept marked one of the most important changes in film exhibition history nationally, moving from the storefront showplace to the picture palace. In the 1920s and 1930s, these massive new venues complemented elaborate designs and luxurious atmospheres with extravagant stage shows, orchestras, etc., to the point where an individual film was almost irrelevant amidst the surroundings. Typically having at least 1,000 seats, they often offered amenities like windowed smoking rooms, where men could watch films while smoking, and cry rooms, where women could hold crying babies and not miss the movie. Picture Palace's architects experimented with styles spanning the ages and the globe, such as the Moorish design of South Pasadena's 1925 1,200-seat Rialto Theater, and the Beaux Arts architecture at Pasadena's 2,200-seat 1921 Raymond Theater. Both of them survive today, albeit not as movie showcases. Although these glamorous picture palaces were relatively affordable, most were built in larger cities or cities with a generally affluent population, where they would fit well into the local self-conception and lifestyle. In the Inland Empire and San Gabriel Valley, that meant they were found not only in urban centers like Pasadena and San Bernardino, but in places that had wealth and booming downtowns due to their crucial roles in the region's citrus industry, such as Redlands and Pomona. Pomona, for instance, had one of the highest per capita incomes in the nation during the 1920s. Thus, not surprisingly, it boasted not just one but two picture palaces: the 1923 California Theater, which had 1,275 seats and Egyptian Revival architecture, and the 1931 Fox Theater, with its Art Deco architecture and over 1,750 seats. The Pomona Fox and a number of other San Gabriel Valley and Inland Empire picture palaces were created especially to hold sneak previews and test screenings of unedited versions of upcoming national release films. Of course, these pictures normally came from whichever movie studio owned the theater's circuit. Some larger movie houses not connected to studios hosted such events as well, though, as seen here with the Paramount sneak preview featured at Chino Theater's 1947 grand opening. Over the years, numerous movie stars, directors, and producers traveled to the area to attend showings and receive feedback from the audience. In fact, Riverside hosted the first public screenings of several of the most important films in cinematic history. In 1915, the Loring Theater, formerly the Loring Opera House, test screened The Klansman, after which its director, D.W. Griffith, made a number of changes to the controversial picture, including its title, which became, as you probably guessed, Birth of a Nation. Meanwhile, the Fox Riverside Theater, which had a neon preview sign on its tower that would light up to announce the events, boasted the first public screening of Gone with the Wind in 1939. Similarly, San Bernardino's California Theater hosted test showings for both The Wizard of Oz and King Kong. The region's status as a popular test market was probably due to the fact that, despite its great wealth and high level of urbanity, it was the closest thing to, say, the rural Midwest that studio executives could find in their immediate vicinity. The area was so well known for its make or break previews that the iconic 1950 film Sunset Boulevard referenced it, with its screenwriter main character responding to a fading actress's terrible screenplay concept with the sarcastic line, "They'll love it in Pomona." I should note that some local show places hosted not just test screenings, but world premieres, generally at grand openings or reopenings after significant renovations, etc. That was even the case at drive-ins, such as the Palm Springs Drive-In, which opened in 1964 with the world premiere of Disney's The Three Lives of Thomasina. In the 1920s to 1940s, a common feature of both picture palaces and smaller movie houses was eye-catching architecture inside and out, especially the new style known as Art Deco. Many older theaters used a variety of traditional architectural styles or were simply standard commercial buildings, but these were meant to be noticed as fresh and exciting and innovative. Examples like Victorville's 1936 Mesa Theater intentionally stood out in their historic downtowns. And if a theater didn't start out being Art Deco, many were remodeled during this era to become that way. That happened at Chino's Woods Theater, which went from a 1912 neoclassical facade to the 1937 design shown here. Meanwhile, other new theaters' designs referenced local history and culture, bringing in popular regional styles. Many venues showcased Spanish colonial revival architecture, as Monrovia's 1925 Picture Palace, the Lyric Theater, did. Others featured the tile roofs and multiple arches of Mission Revival architecture, as seen at San Bernardino's 1929 Fox Theater. Despite theater architects' frequent use of styles reflecting the region's diverse heritage, during this period, many or most movie venues were segregated, even in Southern California. That included the Spanish colonial revival Lyric in Monrovia. Some would not even let minorities enter, One Black resident's oral history of African American life in Pasadena noted that the 1928 Park Theater, which had closed by the time of this 1955 photo, was one of the few show places in the city that admitted African Americans. Where they were allowed in, minorities were typically relegated to their own section, usually in the balcony or at the very back of the auditorium. Here in the Inland Empire and San Gabriel Valley, that was the case not just with African Americans, as was common elsewhere, but also with Latinos and Native Americans. As one example, when San Jacinto's Temple Theater opened in 1912, and you can just see its blade sign over in the corner there, the local newspaper noted that it would offer a separate entrance for, quote, Mexicans and Indians who will be seated by themselves, unquote. Still, some local movie houses catered to that important local market by offering Spanish language screenings regularly, such as once a week, for years during the segregation era. Those examples were especially found in agricultural areas where Hispanic laborers were common. That was the case in Chino, where the Woods Theater played such pictures often, but not exclusively, from the 1930s to the 1960s. Indio's Desert Theater also did so at various points, as shown by the Spanish language films on its marquee in this 1950s postcard. Unfortunately, it shows up on the here, but trust me, there are Spanish language films on that 1950s marquee. A few early movie venues opened entirely to fill an unmet need by serving Hispanic audiences, offering either Spanish language or Spanish subtitled films. A prominent example was in Corona, where in 1926, J.J. Cruz opened Teatro Chapultepec as an alternative to the city's segregated theaters. It served as a center of Latino community life until 1955. Going back to the example of Mission Revival architecture I used a few slides ago, San Bernardino's Fox Theater had the severe misfortune of opening in September 1929, the month before a stock market crash launched the Great Depression. The 1855-seat Picture Palace, the Picture Palace's attendance suffered greatly as a result, and it consequently sat unused from 1933 until 1939. A number of local movie houses went out of business permanently during the Depression, but others, like the Fox, were able to reopen when local conditions improved. That also happened with Sierra Madre's 1926 Wisteria Theater, which shuttered in 1931 but came back to life in 1940. Even during that tumultuous economic period in American history, picture palaces and other movie houses kept opening, including in neighborhoods outside historic downtowns, partially because people were still flocking to theaters. Movie venues offered attendees a brief but valuable escape during the Great Depression. They provided affordable entertainment, plus monetary contests, prize raffles, etc., as seen at Pasadena's 1931 United Artists Theater. In my book's cover image here, on the marquee, you see that the massive crowd is waiting because there is a giveaway of a free 1936 Plymouth sedan. Film exhibitors' development and expansion plans were temporarily halted, and the Picture Palace construction era ended because of World War II and its resulting supply shortages, rationing, etc. However, existing movie houses played important roles in the war effort, showing newsreels to an eager audience, hosting war bond drives, and holding collection events for items like scrap metal and rubber. Ontario's 1926 Granada Theater did all those things. Note the pile of donated rubber in front of the marquee, which lists 1942 movies to date it there. Meanwhile, military bases and related facilities sprang up across this region. Most of them included auditoriums where soldiers watched first-run films, including at a 1,200-seat theater in the 1944 Recreation Building, there in the 1941 United States Naval Hospital in Norco. During World War II, an interesting and unique phenomenon occurred in a few of our region's larger movie venues. Long before the multiplex era began, as we understand it, they multiplexed themselves by creating separate theaters with their own distinct identities in unused spaces. For instance, having started out showcasing both film and vaudeville, but having since switched entirely to movies, the 1928 Fox Redlands Theater no longer needed its large backstage area. So, to increase its film exhibition potential in the city, in 1941, Fox West Coast turned that part of the Picture Palace into the Grove Theater, which had a different name, marquee, box office, etc. In this photograph, you can see the Grove's marquee on the right and the Fox's marquee left around the corner. Both still stand today, converted to other uses. Meanwhile, James Edward wanted to build upon the 1923 Alhambra Theater's success. In 1940, he pioneered a type of multiplex nationally by turning an adjacent storefront into a second theater. And it was called the Annex or the Single Bill Theater. Although the Annex shared a lobby and box office with the main Alhambra Theater, Edwards advertised the two as completely separate venues. Following World War II, post-war life brought changes that impacted the film exhibition industry, including the rise of a more automobile-focused society and an increasing shift of families from cities and small towns to suburbs. That led to the arrival of a new form of theater that would draw people away from indoor movie houses of all types. The drive-in, which was ideally suited to and would become an icon of the growing American car culture. Most drive-ins arose on cities' outskirts and in fast-expanding suburbs, especially along major thoroughfares, most prominently Route 66, where over half a dozen drive-ins sat in this region. Improving on the earlier airdrome idea, drive-ins flourished post-war, especially due to their reputation as a casual, family-friendly place where parents could feel comfortable taking young children during the baby boom era. Many offered amenities just for kids, such as the 1948 Rubidoux Drive-In's petting zoo, playground, and mini railroad. Those elements didn't last, but the Rubidoux itself still operates. Some local drive-ins even held Sunday church services, including Arcadia's 1949 Edwards Drive-In Theater. By 1969, per Film Daily Yearbook, the San Gabriel Valley and Inland Empire boasted over 30 drive-in theaters, many of them run by the Pacific Theater circuit. Southern California soon became world-renowned for its car culture and car-centric architecture, and the San Gabriel Valley and Inland Empire played key roles in that reputation. Taking marketing and design lessons from their indoor competitors, drive-in owners and architects here and elsewhere often made their few structures into self-advertisements and eye-catching works of art, designed to attract the attention of people in passing cars. Depictions of local history and culture frequently appeared at local drive-ins, which often boasted dramatic neon marquees and impressive screen murals. For instance, the 1964 Mount Baldy Drive-In, located on Route 66 in Laverne, had an animated neon marquee displaying skiers at the theater's namesake ski resort. Perhaps the most elaborate local example was Montclair's 1948 Valley Drive-In, which boasted what was reportedly the world's largest neon mural, with 2,500 square feet of neon depicting an early California mission scene. As drive-ins sprang up post-war, before the decline of indoor theaters began in earnest, a new generation of movie house was born. Usually located on main roads in areas with other new development, like outlying neighborhoods and new suburbs, these freestanding venues often had as many seats as the prior picture palaces did, plus similar offerings like cry rooms and smoking rooms, both of which Montebello's 1,000-seat 1950 Garmar Theater offered. But they also featured aspects like large parking lots, such as the Garmars, which held 400 cars, vibrant modernist architecture, and supposedly the latest and supposedly best technology. That included innovations like the Garmar's cycloramic screen and the 1967 Camelot Theater's floor-to-ceiling curved widescreen and its D150 all-purpose projection system meant for playing 70mm and CinemaScope films. To compete, many downtown theaters made technological upgrades as well, but parking was often a negative point of comparison. Palm Springs' still open Camelot Theater was built in the parking lot of an existing indoor mall, the since demolished Palm Springs Shopping Center. Others, though, were designed to be integral parts of shopping centers, whether as anchors inside indoor malls or as inline portions of smaller strip malls. The latter was the case in San Dimas, where the Canyon Theater opened in 1966 as part of the now razed Canyon Center. It survived as a rare suburban shopping center, single-screen movie house until 1998. As time passed, indoor theaters and drive-ins alike faced an onslaught of challenges. Some were simply forces of nature that hit local areas particularly hard. Fire was a common culprit for indoor movie houses' loss, destroying 4 different venues in Big Bear alone. The final one there was the 1946 Big Bear Theater, which operated into the late 1980s before fire destroyed it. Meanwhile, here in Southern California, as you can imagine, earthquakes also caused irreparable damage to multiple historic theaters. Especially hard hit was Alhambra, where 2 earthquakes decimated 3 of its downtown movie venues. The 1971 Sylmar earthquake, with its 6.6 magnitude, caused the demolition of the Capri Theater, which had opened in 1917 with a different name. Yes. I'm right. That was the Sylmar, and then there's one more. Though these are the ones in Alhambra. They didn't happen in Alhambra. The theaters were in Alhambra. The earthquakes themselves were not in Alhambra. Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. The 1971 Sylmar earthquake destroyed the Capri Theater. And then the 1987 Whittier Narrows earthquake, which was 5.9 magnitude, led to the death of 2 other Alhambra theaters, including the 1921 Temple Theater, which was then called the El Rey Theater. And it also resulted in the loss of the Alhambra Twin Cinemas, which was the current name for the combined Alhambra Theater and its pioneering annex. As decades passed in post-war America, both single-screen indoor theaters and drive-ins began to lose attendance. For drive-ins and downtown movie houses, one of the most important reasons for the decline was suburbanization. This was due in large part to the 1956 creation of the interstate highway system. Interstates wreaked havoc on businesses, including theaters, located on what were previously regional thoroughfares, especially those in historic downtowns that got bypassed. Route 66 was especially impacted, as depicted by the decaying, photogenic, and now gone remains of the 1948 Barlin Drive-In screen tower in the desert in Linwood. Travelers staying in nearby Barstow for the night no longer passed the Barlin on Route 66 and stopped in for an evening's entertainment. Redevelopment was also an issue, due to the rising value of land in many parts of the San Gabriel Valley and Inland Empire, such as in the much less deserted stretch of Route 66 in the LA suburb of Duarte. As their areas boomed with growth, many drive-ins' large lots became more valuable for other uses. The vast majority of local drive-ins thus fell, many replaced by suburban icons. A strip mall replaced Duarte's 650-car 1949 Big Sky Drive-In in 1984. Other drive-ins that we saw today met similar fates. Arcadia's Edwards Drive-In became a housing subdivision, while Montclair's Valley Drive-In got demolished for a car dealership. Meanwhile, the rise in the 1960s and beyond of purpose-built multiplex theaters, particularly those located at highway exits and in new suburban shopping centers, was a harbinger of death for many single-screen indoor theaters and drive-ins. The early multiplexes, especially twins and triplexes, were usually plain box-like small cinemas that basically reverted to the Nickelodeon era in their simplicity, as seen with the 1971 Rosemead 4 theaters. Their humble appearance made no difference, though. With the greatly increased selection and convenience they offered, they were successful enough to cause the closure of innumerable historic theaters both here and across the US. Another factor in historic movie venues' mass downfall was the arrival of multiple new technologies that encouraged former moviegoers to spend more time watching films in their own homes. Some of the most commonly cited causes nationally are the coming of the TV set, followed by color TV, cable, and the VCR. The latter brought the easy availability of movies for rental or purchase at places like Blockbuster Video, which opened its first store in 1985 and had over 6,000 locations worldwide by the late 1990s. So, how did historic theaters try to survive all of these new challenges? They used multiple methods, some more successful than others. In this region and across the country, Many larger single-screen theater operators decided to compete head-on with their main competition, multiplexes, by multiplexing their own theaters. Many drive-in sprawling lots could easily hold additional screens. For instance, in the City of Industry, the 1955 Vinland Drive-In's 1,700-car parking area gained 3 more screens in 1981. The previously shown Rubidoux Drive-In, meanwhile, now operates as a triplex. Some indoor venues split their auditoriums in 2, while others added screens in their balconies, which was the case at the previously mentioned Fox Redlands, where the balcony got 2 80-inch screens in 1981. Some freestanding movie houses, like Palm Springs' still operational Camelot Theater, were able to expand their buildings to add extra auditoriums. The majority of the historic movie venues open today locally have become multi-screen operations. In most cases, though, adding more screens wasn't enough to keep older theaters competitive. Route 66's Barstow Theater, which opened in 1950 and gained a second screen in its auditorium as the renamed Barstow Cinema 1 and 2, shuttered, that was in 1976. It shuttered barely a decade later. For indoor movie houses, another survival tactic was remodeling, often along with a renaming. Their owners were trying to make something old, or as we would say now, historic, seem new and fresh, like their suburban competitors. Interior remodels might include upgrades to the sound system or the seats, while outside, historic facades were often significantly transformed or at least covered up. Using metal slipcovers was a simple way to drastically change a building's appearance, as seen here with Pasadena's 1925 Warner's Egyptian Theater, which received a major exterior makeover in the early 1960s when it was called the Uptown Theater. In the Uptown's case, it closed in the 1980s and has since sat vacant. For drive-ins, some found at least temporary success by adding a daytime usage for their large parking lots, swap meets. In Yucca Valley, the 1959 Sky Drive-In started hosting a flea market in 1971. However, as seen here, that use couldn't save the theater, or most of its compatriots. Ever since the Sky stopped showing movies in 1994, its marquee has survived to advertise not films, but the property's swap meet. When remodeling didn't save a theater, and you can tell remodeling definitely happened with the 1921 Hemet Theater, another step was to shift away from showing pricey first-run films to screening second-run movies at a discount. The Hemet Theater made that switch in 1994, about a month after a 12-screen multiplex opened nearby. But becoming dollar theaters didn't help most venues survive for long either. The historic Hemet Movie House, for instance, went out of business less than a year later. It reopened a decade later, though, advertising itself as the home of the classics, as seen here. From then until 2013, it operated with a mix of repertory, bargain, and art house movies. While dollar theaters appealed to moviegoers who wanted or needed bargain entertainment, and art house and classic movies were meant to attract highbrow film aficionados, other historic theaters tried to reach a different niche audience by playing adult films. Multiple local movie houses made that controversial switch, frequently as part of circuits, especially the statewide Pussycat Theaters chain. Pussycat ran Riverside's 1942 Lido Theater from 1978 to 1991. And I should mention that similar to Redlands Grove Theater, the Lido was originally the Fox Riverside stage loft area. The closing in 91, that was longer than many similar theaters lasted as adult venues locally. Most were fairly short-lived, as operators dealt with protests, arrests, lawsuits, etc. One of the earliest and longest lasting of this type was Pasadena's Oaks Theater, which had opened in 1910 as Fisher's Theater, and which started showing X-rated movies very early, 1959. Interestingly, it later multiplexed, adding a 30-seat auditorium upstairs called the Tomcat. That tiny space played gay porn. So interesting. The adults-only facility, which was independent, remained open until its 1977 demolition for redevelopment. As our region grew, many of its community's demographics shifted in crucial ways. The major influx of Latino residents and the oft-resulting white flight led to many historic movie theaters changing entirely to playing Spanish-language films. That occurred in the 1980s in El Monte, where with both the 1948 El Monte Drive-In and the 1939 El Monte Theater. The indoor movie house also multiplexed, becoming a twin during that decade. Then, in the 1990s, it served the same audience with American movies subtitled in Spanish, along with Latino-oriented plays and performances. Those stopped in the early 2000s. Other theaters seen earlier in this presentation that switched to Spanish language films include Ontario's Granada Theater, the Paris Theater, and the Fox Theaters in Pomona and Riverside. Meanwhile, the Western San Gabriel Valley became the nation's main site of Asian immigration in the 1980s and beyond. Some movie venues in its previously majority white suburbs switched to screening aimed Asian language movies, mostly in Chinese. That happened at the 1942 San Gabriel Theater, which Edwards Theaters shuttered in 1979. It quickly reopened as the Kuo Hua Theater, with lessees playing Asian language films until 1995. Today, despite having adjusted to the local population's demographic transformations, none of the area's formerly ethnic/racially focused cinemas still operate as such today. Across our region and throughout the country, scores of historic movie theaters, both indoor and drive-in, found the challenges facing them to be insurmountable. The closed for goods sign on the 1945 Yucaipa Theater, which hung up its hat around 1965, is emblematic of this outcome. Its downtown building was lucky enough to survive, albeit unrecognizably, but other closed venues fell to the wrecking ball. The wrecking ball's impact is visible in this 1977 photograph of the demolition of the Cinemaland Theater on Route 56 in Arcadia. It had opened as a neighborhood movie house called the Santa Anita Theater in 1942 with great fanfare, complete with a parade and Hollywood celebrities attending. Many of the examples in this presentation of similarly once vibrant showplaces met that same sad fate. In some cases, both here and in other areas, when historic theaters fell, their replacement should have been no surprise. The competition had taken over. In Pasadena, the 1950 Hastings Drive-In's parking lot became the home of the 1968 Pasadena Hastings Theater, one of the modernist freestanding single-screen venues of the type discussed earlier. It later expanded into a 5-screen multiplex and then became an 8-screen complex. Meanwhile, Edwards Theaters opened Temple City's Temple Theater in 1940 and closed it in 1982, replacing it with a box-like multiplex, the Edwards Temple Cinema 4. Notably, both of those replacement multiplexes have since been demolished, their size and capabilities not able to match those of even newer facilities. As shown with the Edwards Temple Cinema 4 and the previously seen Rosemead 4 theaters, many early multiplexes soon found themselves facing similar problems to those encountered by historic movie houses and drive-ins. They were too old, too small, too plain, and they offered too few amenities that contemporary audiences wanted. Larger, nicer, more elaborate multiplexes kept opening, and older venues of all types couldn't keep pace with the trends. One of those trends was the megaplex, which reached its national height right here in the Inland Empire in 1996. That was when the AMC circuit's AMC Ontario Mills 30 opened in a new Ontario mall, proudly advertising itself as, quote, the world's largest theater. Another 30-screen AMC complex followed soon thereafter in the San Gabriel Valley city of Covina, and those numbers have not been exceeded in the US since. In fact, as shown by the Covina AMC's later shrinking itself from 30 to 17 screens, having so many small auditoriums became something of a liability, versus fancier venues with somewhat fewer auditoriums, but more space to spread out in recliners, etc. The return of the attractiveness aspect that used to be common to historic movie theaters resulted in what I call the Palaceplex. Ontario's Edwards Mountain Village Stadium 14, which you saw earlier, is one example, as is another venue that opened in the same parking lot as the AMC Ontario Mills 30 as its main competitor just a year later, the appropriately named and themed Edwards Ontario Palace 22. Beyond its appealing design, it attracts moviegoers with auditoriums featuring high-end, expensive technologies like IMAX and the immersive Screen X, which audiences pay extra to experience. Another Palaceplex, the Krikorian Monrovia Cinema 12, opened in 2000 in an unexpected location where its traditional architecture fit in well, a historic downtown. Seen above, since 2017, it has operated as a dine-in movie house, first with the Studio Movie Grill chain, and now the Look Dine-In Cinemas chain, which offer moviegoers seat-based drinking and dining. Such venues, which have become popular across the US and even now include the AMC Ontario Mills 30, provide a similar experience to what the Monrovia Multiplex promoted on its marquee here. Quote, enjoy an American grill menu plus cocktails at the push of a button. Even Palaceplexes and dine-in facilities, though, have had trouble competing with the newest attraction, keeping film patrons at home. New distribution methods for movie studios, whose wares moved from videotapes to DVDs to the now ever-present ease and practically unlimited selection of streaming services, such as Netflix and Hulu. Many of the studios are now returning to their prior era of vertical integration, owning the means of distribution by creating their own subscription streamers, like Warner's Max service and Disney+. Premium video on demand is also quite popular, with home viewers able to purchase or rent recent films from within the comfort of their own couch, sometimes within weeks of, or even the same day as, their release in movie theaters. That last trend towards streaming was greatly exacerbated by the arrival of the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic in 2000, which made home-based viewing options move to the forefront. Indoor movie theaters across the country had to stay shuttered for months. The marquee at Regal's Indio Metro 8 optimistically stated, temporarily closed. However, many historic and contemporary theaters, both locally and across the US, never reopened, which was the case with the Indio Theater. While others opened only to close again after being deemed financially unviable. The nation lost over 2,000 movie screens during the pandemic, about 5% of the total. Many closures occurred as a result of circuits bankruptcies. One of those was Regal's parent company, with Regal closing dozens of multiplexes, including multiple in this area. Even the hip Studio Movie Grill chain went bankrupt and closed its theaters, although its local locations, like Monrovia's, soon reopened with new branding. Meanwhile, the former local drive-in behemoth, Pacific Theaters, closed all of its 17 Pacific and ArcLight theaters, including multiple locations in this area. The family-owned business did keep one drive-in, the Vinland, operating. Even that shut down in 2022, then hosted nothing but a weekly movie festival on a sole screen in summer 2023, with no screenings since. It remains in limbo. For a short time, though, the Vinland was one of many drive-ins here and elsewhere that found themselves having an unlikely resurgence as a result of the pandemic. As indoor cinemas sat empty, people wanting to get out of the house flocked to local drive-ins, where being in their own cars or sitting outdoors on lawn chairs seemed like a safe and fun activity. America's approximately 300 remaining drive-ins were, briefly, once again the place to be. Once movie houses, both historic and new, reopened, though, they faced another major problem. Like many other non-essential businesses, movie studios had stopped their operations during part of the pandemic, leaving their expected movies either unfinished or completely unstarted, wreaking havoc on anticipated release schedules that had once been full of product. Theaters nationally found themselves with few films to play, and for the films they did have, a large part of the audience was reluctant to return because of safety considerations and changing habits, such as streaming. Most recently, as the movie industry and film exhibition tried to move on from the pandemic-related challenges, their struggles were compounded by dual Hollywood strikes in 2013. The lengthy but eventually successful writers and actors strikes paused most TV and movie filming in the US. As a result, have then and still now found themselves yet again facing a dearth of major releases to show. The amount of movies being released is down, attendance is down, and box office figures are also down. The prevailing wisdom is that the industry will never recover to its pre-pandemic levels. Existing theaters will have to contend with what is apparently the new normal. However, many already closed historic theaters, both here and across the US, provide a potential path forward for at least some venues. Although they may not show films anymore, they survive as examples of preservation and adaptive reuse. On Route 66 in Azusa, although most of the 1961 Azusa Foothill Drive-In Theater no longer stands, its impressive roadside marquee was restored and now promotes community events. That was part of a hard-fought preservation compromise with the property's 2001 buyer, Azusa Pacific University, after the then operational drive-in was successfully nominated to the California Register of Historical Resources. I researched and wrote that nomination for the Los Angeles Conservancy. While that preservation attempt was only partially successful, other preservation campaigns have had much better results. Two of our region's most significant picture palaces, the Foxes in Pomona and Riverside, both reopened as live venues in 2009 and 2010, respectively, following lengthy multi-million-dollar restorations. Both now host major concerts from national tours, while the Riverside Fox also holds touring Broadway productions and other events, now called the Fox Performing Arts Center. Thus, although the Pomona and Riverside Foxes no longer show films, they still play a vital role in their cities through adaptive reuse. That is the case with many former movie theaters. Their most common adaptive reuse in this region and across the country is as live performance venues. That type of conversion, of course, actually brings the pre-film conceptualization, brings the buildings full circle, back to the pre-film conceptualization of the theater, or at least it returns them to the area where movies and vaudeville coexisted. Beyond the Dual Foxes reopening, the most notable local example of this conversion category was San Bernardino's 1928 California Theater, which has served as the California Theater of the Performing Arts since 1969. Such places help draw people back downtown, provide important cultural and educational opportunities, and enrich community life. Because of the fact that they have auditoriums, closed movie theaters are also ideal settings for becoming sanctuaries for churches. Upland's 1947 Grove Theater recently had a church conversion, the building's second adaptive reuse, having previously operated as a community playhouse from 1991 until the pandemic caused its closure in 2020. Still other local movie venues have turned into banquet venues and event rental facilities, including two picture palaces, the Foxes in San Bernardino and Redlands. They now hold events like wedding receptions and proms in their former auditoriums. Meanwhile, Lake Elsinore's former Lake Theater both offers event rentals and serves its area in another important way. The government-run facility operates as the Lake Community Center, the city's combination community center and senior center. Another common reuse version, which takes many different forms, is for theaters to change to commercial usage. Some have become stores, such as Riverside's 1939 De Anza Theater, which has held a market since 1988. Its landmark exterior still looks much as it did in its heyday. Very few historic movie theaters still provide locals with movie-going opportunities today. In the San Gabriel Valley, only one historic indoor theater remains operational. No drive-ins do, although the Vinland might still make a comeback. Meanwhile, the Inland Empire can boast 4 drive-ins and 4 historic movie houses open. Of those survivors, though, few remain single-screen. The one-screen film show places that have lasted, including 29 Palms' 1956 Smith's Ranch Drive-In and Idlewild's appropriately named 1945 Rustic Theater, have generally accomplished that feat because they are in isolated areas where locals have little alternative, because they are in vacation destinations where moviegoing is a fun, nostalgic activity for visitors, or both. I would encourage everyone to support the rare historic theaters that remain. Thank you so much.